The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker is the latest installment in the long-running Legend of Zelda series that has spanned basically all of Nintendo's consoles. This latest rendition has definitely kind of taken a weird path to market, but today we're going to go over that past, as well as talk about what the game really is and some of the items you'll encounter throughout the game. Zelda for the GameCube was first shown at Space World, which is Nintendo's Japanese trade show, in the year 2000. There wasn't necessarily a game title associated with it or any kind of release date given. It was just a video clip that showed Link and Ganon duking it out, and they looked pretty realistic. You know, there was an adult Link from the Ocarina of Time, and you know, the classic Ganon figure really going at it in a sword fight, and you know, it definitely had a pretty cool look to it. The same footage was shown at E3 the following year. And people, you know, kind of got used to this footage and said, okay, well, this is what the Zelda game's going to look like, even though no game had really formally been announced. Fast forward to the next Space World. At Space World 2001, an entirely new Zelda was shown. And this was the cel-shaded, cartoony-looking, youthful Zelda that we ended up with today. At the time of its announcement, it was definitely met with a lot of controversy. There were a lot of people that felt that kind of the rug had been pulled out from under them, and you know, a lot of people weren't really sure what to think. But you know, now that the game is out and we've you know, definitely played the heck out of it, you know, that's really kind of unfounded. The game is a very beautiful-looking game. Just graphically, it really kind of blows everything else away on the GameCube as far as artistic style goes. And you know, it really kind of stands up to the rest of the Zelda series as a fantastic-looking and fun-playing game. At the start of the Wind Waker, it's Link's birthday. He lives on Outset Island with his sister and his grandmother. It's just another quiet day on the island, of course. A large bird carrying a girl flies to the island with a pirate ship giving chase, firing cannonballs all the while. Eventually, Link will save this girl and return her to her pirate friends. But in the course of action, Link's sister gets kidnapped by this giant bird and they're flown off to a gigantic island fortress. Link, of course, wanting to be the hero that he eventually will be, sets off to give chase to rescue his sister, and as these things go, uncovers a large, nefarious, world-endangering plot along the way. Along the way, of course, Link will encounter a lot of different items that he can use to get past certain sequences, and as the Legend of Zelda games go, you'll require these items to beat a lot of the game's bosses and make a lot of forward progress. You'll see a lot of returning items in the game, items that we've seen in the Ocarina of Time and even previous Zelda games from that. You'll see the boomerang, which basically returns from the Ocarina of Time intact, but now it'll actually lock onto 5 targets at once. So you'll see little explosions appear on various items, and then the boomerang will fly out and get all those items and fly back. A few puzzles actually take that into consideration or require you to target things in the right order. The Deku Leaf is a new item, and it's basically a gigantic leaf that you can either swat enemies down with large gusts of wind, or you can hold it over your head like a parachute or a glider and glide across gaps, you know, glide down from long falls and things of that nature. The grappling hook is a very cool new item. It'll latch on to special grapple targets, but you can also use it to attack foes. It won't actually kill many of the enemies, but you'll actually be able to use it to steal items from them. You'll kind of start spinning the grappling hook, throw it out, and grab whatever item away from the enemy that's holding it. You'll do a lot of swinging around in the game, though only at these specified targets. It's not the sort of thing where you have to look very hard to find the grappling hook targets. What good would a 3D Zelda game be without a bow and arrow? Not much of a Zelda game, really. So the bow and arrow does return, as well as various arrow types. You'll have your fire arrows, you'll have your ice arrows, you'll have your light arrows, of course. And you know, these come into play just as you'd expect they would. You know, you're using fire arrows to melt ice, and using ice arrows to put out fire, and using, you know, standard arrows to shoot bats out of the sky. It's a pretty straightforward process, and of course you can go into a first-person viewpoint to manually aim these arrows if so desired. The hookshot returns in the game. The hookshot also appeared in games as far back as A Link to the Past. And it basically works the same here as it does there. Of course, it's just in 3D. You'll have special hookshot targets that you can use to hook onto, and it works a lot like the grappling hook, only without the swinging and climbing action. It'll just drag you to things. You can also use it to pull enemies toward you. Probably the most unique item in the game is the Tingle Tuner. You'll get this item pretty early on, and basically what it does is it enables the Game Boy Advance to GameCube connectivity option. And then once you've found this item, you can use it to call Tingle, the wannabe fairy, and he'll show up on your Game Boy screen while you're playing the game. And a lot of this is kind of made for two people to play the game at the same time. You know, say a young child's playing the game, the parent could have the Game Boy and kind of be reading the hints that come up and looking at maps and things of that nature. But it's also good for if you're getting stuck in certain puzzles. The Tingle Tuner will kind of give you a little bit of advice there as well. The game's namesake is a conductor's baton called the Wind Waker. Like the Ocarina of Time before it, the Wind Waker is a musical instrument in its own right that you'll use to play specific songs that have various magical effects. Throughout the game, you'll learn new songs for your Wind Waker, and these vary from things that will control the direction of the wind, which is very important throughout the course of the game. You can change night into day and back again. You can warp around the map. You can command various characters in certain dungeons, which is required to move forward in some spots. Basically, it's kind of your all-purpose magical device. You also encounter a lot of other items throughout the game, and some of these can be very important to proceeding. You'll find things like bombs, bottles to store potions and fairies in. You'll, of course, get iron boots that you can use when you need to weigh yourself down. And, a Zelda game wouldn't be a Zelda game if you didn't eventually get the Master Sword, so, of course, that's in there, too. Being another 3D Zelda game, the Wind Waker actually controls almost identically to the previous 3D Zelda games. You'll definitely find a lot of the Ocarina of Time here as far as control goes. You don't do your own jumping, you can just run off of ledges and Link will jump across objects. You can do forward rolls and various other styles of attacks. By the end of the game, you'll actually learn a charged up sword attack that will let you do this kind of spinning blade dash that will go for a few seconds, and that's actually a pretty funny animation because Link kind of loses control of it and goes flying all over the screen. Zelda for the N64 basically originated the concept of Z targeting, and with that you would hold the Z trigger to lock onto an enemy, and then you'd be able to kind of circle strafe around them and really focus on one opponent at a time. For the GameCube version, they've moved this functionality to one of the triggers, and it basically works identically to how it did on the N64. You'll hold in the trigger, you'll lock onto enemies, and you'll be able to roll around, jump around, and basically, jack up any enemy you want. And that's also where the game's new move comes into play, which is the reversal or kind of counter-strike maneuver. You'll see a little flashing A in the corner of the screen when an enemy's about to strike you. And if you can hit A at the right moment, you'll actually either roll around a foe and get at their back or jump over their head and do kind of a falling slash. There's a lot of little cool combat techniques, and this is actually one of the most effective means for combat and one of the few ways to hit some enemies. So we've established that Zelda is basically a huge water world with a lot of little islands. And of course, on those islands you'll find dungeons. A Zelda game wouldn't be a Zelda game without a handful of dungeons, and the Wind Waker definitely delivers on this aspect. The dungeons you find in the game vary in size and structure. They'll also kind of have their own theme to them. You'll find a plant dungeon, you'll find a sand dungeon, a water dungeon. None of the dungeons ever really get as devious as some of the dungeons in the Ocarina of Time did. I know the water temple in the Ocarina of Time is kind of the moment that stands out for a lot of players as kind of the defining moment of that game as far as difficulty is concerned. None of the dungeons ever get that devious in the Wind Waker, but there definitely are some cool puzzles and cool tricks and cool enemies to see throughout the game's dungeons. Each dungeon has its own boss and its own item. The story goes something like this. About halfway through the dungeon, you'll find a new item. That item will usually let you get past certain places where you couldn't get past before and essentially let you get to the boss. And then more often than not, you'll use that same item to defeat the boss. The boss fights aren't necessarily difficult, but they're all very unique and they all look pretty cool. You'll find a large ghost that you'll have to roll into spikes to get him to break up into a bunch of little ghosts. You'll find a gigantic sandworm, who's actually the most difficult boss in the game, not counting the final encounter. All the boss fights are pretty interesting when all is said and done. In the end, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker does basically what you would expect a Zelda game to do. It sticks pretty close to the blueprint laid out by the Ocarina of Time, but takes it in just enough of a new direction and definitely enhances the graphics in a major, major way. GameCube owners definitely shouldn't miss this game.